Hi, my name is Christina Morris, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a classical musician currently studying string bass and orchestral conducting, and I will be moderating today's discussion on the diversification of classical music. With that said, I would like to open up the floor and let everyone introduce themselves, and we could jump right in.
Hey there, my name is Clérida and I am a classically trained cellist. I'm based out in Long Island, New York, and I freelance all across the tri-state area. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Clifton, a bassoonist and composer from Houston, Texas. I'm also classically trained like everyone else, and I went to Peabody for undergrad. Just did the graduate diploma at Mannes and starting my master's this fall at Manhattan School of Music. Even though I'm classically trained, I don't really play in that style so much anymore. I do more of free improv and that landscape and mixed media and things like that. But I'm super happy to be in this space with these wonderful people and here to speak our minds.
And I am Priscilla Rinehart, also classically trained in the French horn. I play right now full-time in the Sarasota Orchestra, which is in Florida. I am from Florida, so it's nice to be back living near my hometown. I went to the Juilliard School in New York City and then studied at the New World Symphony in Miami Beach, also in Florida. And yeah, I'm happy to be here in this discussion, getting to speak our minds freely. It's a pleasure, so I'm excited.
Sounds great. So let's jump right in. So my first question for this discussion was, what general aspect of classical music performance would you like to see change and why? I'm leaving the floor open for this one.
My first thing I wanted to throw in is that the word change already in that question, like the notion that classical music is so slow to change in any regard. You know, we're talking about race and everything else in here, but you know, even something as simple as challenging one's audience. You know, we are an art form, and I think art is meant to challenge, and that we could be doing much more of that with little risk, basically, little risk, mostly rewards.
Yeah. For sure. Is there anybody else before I respond?
I would say
I'll go.
You
go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go first, I'll go after.
Still, like, using the word classical music, like, I understand it is very much a genre, but also what are we doing today? Like, when we program Valerie Coleman, you know, is it still classical? Because, you know, the music is being written today. You know, like, why are we holding on to this title so much? And that's what I really wonder with their change, do we just kind of call it music of today, you know, instead of classical music? It makes it, to me, it makes it more inclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, just I think piggybacking off of what you were saying about the term, the word classic, it's like something that's supposed to be timeless, right? And I think there's like a sense of rigidity, I think, in classical music where things have to be done a certain way and it can't differ from this. And, you know, I mean, even the way, I'll use the cello, like the way it's made, it's still made from, you know, using the same techniques from back then. So it's just this general idea of, like, I guess, obviously honoring the past, but as musicians and of course our like who we are and what we represent, I think it definitely needs to incorporate some more of and reflect more of what, you know, the world is today and what music is creating today and who the humans are today that are creating that music. So
yeah. And I like how you said that a lot of it is what was instilled in the past, including the instruments and how they're made. And I think that the idea of classical music performance is really based on this idealized perception of perfection almost. And like for something to be perfect, it has to be like mirroring exactly how it was performed before. And that's the thing that's restricting the the evolution of classical music performance to begin with, I have to say. Because in order for us to be perceived as perfect, no matter what we're doing, we could be playing cello or doing a bassoon solo, or you know what I mean, in front of a group, or whatever the case may be. It's like a lot of it is being based on what was done before and exactly how the way it was done before. And I think that limits us from evolving as a genre, you know, because we could play classical music, we could play Beethoven 16,000 times, but I'm sick of hearing it. And I'm sick of hearing it exactly the way that it's been done before. And if it's done any way that's different, then it's ludicrous. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my gosh, how could you? Like, it's sacrilegious to change it in any way. So God forbid you want to bring something else in and tell somebody else's story on the stage or on the podium. It's like, it's just completely. Yeah, what's up, Priscilla?
I was just going to add also that I think, you know, I'm not a historian, but it does make us wonder, right? Like, is this exactly what Beethoven would have wanted this whole time? To play that same music over and over forever of his? He'd be like, I don't know about that. But I'm guessing, you know, right? It's like the point gets made regardless. But I think also this idea of refinement is useful at times, but I don't think it should be the only thing we strive for in this industry, no matter what we call it, right? I think all of this is worth looking at, always subject to change, but just like typing refinement into a Google search right now, it's like, you know, absence of impurity and all these kinds of things. And I think that's not humanity. So then that's kind of like, what are we trying to represent? You know, something that isn't what we are, something that we're striving to be. So just, you know, things to think about moving forward.
For sure.
Joey?
So with that though, okay, if we're trying to get things that represent, but if this whole system of classical music was built on white supremacy and excluding everyone who did not look like they belonged to the Vienna Phil, how do we bring that representation to today? You know, like, I mean, it's even to the point where, like, it has been demonized, the whole, like, well, Beethoven was black. Like, what if he was black? Like, that's really lit. But they use it in a way of, like, well, there's been diversity the whole time. And it's like, okay, you know? So, for me, it's, like, with classical music, because I haven't stopped playing orchestra, but I do mostly experimental and avant-garde bassoon music these days. And just kind of, like, watching from the outside, it's kind of like, what are we fighting for? You know, like, what is the actual goal? Because we can't I don't think we can actually reform the way classical music works. I think we have to start over. Because, I mean, the whole audition process, tenure, I mean, if someone in the section doesn't fuck with you, if someone in the section doesn't like you, you know, it's not, you might not get that job, you know? So the whole system is messed up. You have to fly. If I wanted to take the Houston Symphony audition, I would have to fly from New York. If it wasn't for Sphinx, that trip would have cost like close to $2,000. You know, like the whole, it's so capitalist. You know, like, sorry, the whole thing is just messed up. So it just all has to be restructured.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
For sure. Okay. Does anyone else have a response before we move on to the next question?
I'm ready.
You look like you're thinking close. Yeah. Okay. So the next question is going to be, what is a change you wish to see and enforce as a student and educator to promote diversity in the classical music institution?
We already got Joey's answer. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Anyone?
Okay.
Well, yeah.
So when I think diversity, you know, obviously we think us, people that look like us, but also within our communities, because like with being non-binary and also have bipolar disorder, you know, and having other intersectional things that go with that, there is no room really for accessibility for the Black students they do let into these like conservatories. Because at Peabody there were maybe 10 of us. But while there, like, a lot of Black people have trauma and require counseling and things like that. And with bipolar disorder, Manic episodes like really mess you up, mess your body up. There are no accommodations, you know, and that bleeds to outside of school. You know, medication I was taking with bipolar disorder caused me to start having seizures and passing out. Well, if I was overheating from that, I cannot wear a tux. So there's this one orchestra that contacted me. They wanted me to play with them, but I had to wear the full tails. Firstly, you look like a butler. Secondly, I can't wear this. And they were like, well, you can't play with us. You know, so that's a big thing that needs to be changed with diversity. It's like, firstly, we need to reach people where they are. If you want more Black kids, give them full scholarships. Pay the reparations. You know, that's the one thing that Hopkins like kind of does right. If you are from the Baltimore city limits, I believe that's how it works. You go to Hopkins or any of their schools for free for undergrad. But pay the reparations. Bring us there. Fly us to the audition. Your dorm and food, and the food is terrible, is free. You know, all of these things need to be met. You have to meet people where they are. But you can't say we want diversity but uphold the $70,000 tuition. Don't waive the enrollment fee. Don't help people move in. Everyone's parents cannot fly to these different schools to help them move in. It needs to be a very comfortable environment. Give them all the resources that you have these students that are coming from, the white students coming from Connecticut and went to boarding school, whose parents make like $500,000 a year. You know, we are not the same. Like, you know, so the gaps have to be filled in these schools with accommodations, with resources, counsel, like they have to be filled, or what's the point? Like, why bring a whole bunch of Black kids here to have a terrible, terrible, traumatic time?
No, I agree with you completely. And I have to say, as someone who is still studying and still goes for outside educational opportunities, and I'm still growing, most of the opportunities that I've gotten into were opportunities that were paid for. And I've been blessed enough, you know, to be skilled enough to be accepted into those organizations. But I have to be honest with you, I wouldn't have even known about those organizations because the exposure, I think exposure is the main thing to reach out for you. Outreach. Because if your children or if your youth is not exposed to the opportunities and the chances and the possibilities, then how can you expect for them to reach them? How can you expect for them to aspire to go for them to begin with? And it's really sad because even as a Black student who is studying and who has made it this far, which is really not far at all, I'll be honest with you, but like, because we're always growing, for real. It's an endless, like, it's a life investment, this industry. It really is. And I'm sitting there and I'm learning about the history of it. And all of these stories, I mean, I'm passionate about classical music enough to want to learn about Bach and to want to learn about counterpoint and its views. But could you imagine if I learned about it through someone who had a similar story like mine, or who had a similar background? And I think that that's like the educator's job, is to engage their demographic of students that they have in front of them in the best way that they can. And that takes context. It takes context and whatever appeals to that group of students. Because now how can you expect for that student to be, now they're hearing about a bunch of white people and a bunch of stories that sound nothing like theirs and a bunch of traumas that sound nothing like theirs. And they're like, I don't know if I even want to do this. They're sitting in general music class, like, you know what I mean? And like middle school. And they're like, I don't know if like, this is what I want to do. But they could listen to an R&B song and be like, oh, you know what? I relate to Anita Baker because I was in love with that bitch and blah, blah, blah. Like, you know what I mean? Because they find their story, like they find their story through art in general. It could be visual art. It could be a movie. It could be cinematic, you know, it could, whatever the case may be. And it's the educator's job and the educator's institution's job to help people find their story through that art. That's the point of it. Sorry, please, anyone.
Okay, so to piggyback off of what you said, I think it is very important for students, especially in the classical field, to have teachers and mentors and coaches that look like them, that have been through things, that have walked through the stories and the paths that they are going through right now. I can attest to that wholeheartedly because there are a lot of students that other teachers couldn't connect to them. And it wasn't until I started teaching them and connecting with them and like, you know, learning, even if it's just a stupid little etude on the piano, really, I guess because I guess it's just having that connection. I think a lot of kids don't have that opportunity, or that outlet even. I love where I grew up, which is Brentwood, Long Island. It's a Hispanic based community. And everybody looks like me too. And I love it, and it's great. And it's very inclusive. And I started playing cello in 7th grade in the public schools here. And if it wasn't for that, my parents couldn't afford to send me away for summer camp and do all these weird things and travel, but it was for music that was able to pull me out of that. I got a scholarship and went upstate and started playing and started seeing life outside of this bubble where everybody was Black and brown and looked like me. The power of music, being able to connect with other people and it being able to literally like pick you up out of where you are and displace you somewhere else. I think that's important for us to instill within our, like, to teach our students as well. I feel like I'm rambling, sorry, but I definitely feel like, it's just important for the kids to see themselves and who's teaching them, who's feeding their minds, because that's what they're going to connect to, right? Like I have students that started wearing their hair like me. Like I used to wear space buttons, and it's like they started doing that too. So it's really important to take care of the kids and really be a good not role model necessarily, but just like a good representation of the change you want, I guess, or what you want to see. Within the classical world, that's hard, but it's definitely doable. But yeah. That's that.
I was going to add that there is, well, two things. One really, really short one is that any smaller industry has to look outside of itself to understand, you know, the full spectrum, the magnitude of everything that's going on. And with this issue, like, yeah, you can't just sit inside of classical music to figure out Black people. Like that's, I mean, it sounds obvious, right? But I just think it's worth saying really quick. But I also think diversity in general, in our industry and outside of it, to remember that there is diversity within diversity. Like when we think diversity, or, you know, status quo definition of diversity, right, is like, you know, one of each, that whole thing, like that, you know, Black representation isn't one type of person that has one type of background. Like to Clérida's point about, you know, growing up in a space where it's like full of Black and brown, it all looked like her. You know, for me, I grew up in a white space, you know, like just because we both have brown skin does not mean, you know, and our skin's not the same. Like, let's remember that too, right? Like we do not look the same at all. But I grew up in this space where, like, when I left for college, I, you know, what was opened up to, and not just college, but that's the point I'm making, right? The second, New York City, at least, you know, going from like a mostly white town, or at least I operate in white spaces, to being in New York City, we got everything, just about, you know, and New York City is lit. I loved it. But anyway, but just remembering, like, there's diversity within diversity. Like that's been a big thing for me. You know, I have all kinds of different friends that I don't know everything about their spectrums, you know, like to quote you, Joy, with like bipolar disorder, like I don't have that. Like, let's learn about that. Like Asian American representation, let me learn about that. You know, like we're all here, and almost all of us have dealt with, at least our ancestors, et cetera, all kinds of discrimination, oppression, suppression, whatever. So it's like we have at least some of that in common, but then we can definitely learn about each other and just make better choices in the future for how we're gonna like rebuild or start over, or both. I think lastly, there is room for like some aspects of this institution to survive and thrive under maybe just a different labeling of context, right? Like, okay, classical music is now historical performance, and wasn't it already a bit, you know, whatever. But then to Joy's point, like, yeah, we need to make some new stuff. We just have to. It's too slow for me. So those 3 different points, but you know, it's all related.
Yeah.
So before we move, that what you said, Priscilla, is the thing that I think is also a problem with classical music, because we already make it do stuff. There's so many people making new great things, but the division of classical music does not want to pay attention to it. You know, that's the big thing. When people are like, well, why aren't Black people just making their own thing and getting out of our space? We have. There's the AACM, you know, like it is here. So it has always been here, but the funding is like slow. The stages aren't big enough, you know, like as much as they fight, like everyone looks up to AACM, but it's so tough because these main stages are occupied by Brahms. And you know, Brahms is that girl. You know, I was listening to Brahms 2 the other day, and it's amazing, but exactly how many more times, how many more variations of this are we going to listen to when there are so many composers today that look like us, that are not being programmed, you know, because when they're talking about diversity and changing things in orchestra, they're like, we're going to commission all of these women. And everyone's like, this is awesome. We're in the right direction. But then they like show who they're commissioning, and it's like 10 white women and 1 East Asian woman. That's it. You know, so what is the difference? Like, what is happening here? You know, white supremacy is just put in a different role. So, you know, it's just the whole system gotta go.
I have to be honest. And I feel like in order to, especially in this industry, in order to spark change in this industry is like a constant pendulum between fitting into this box and being good enough to present in the major performance institutions, and then almost like breaking the barrier of that box and letting the arts like express themselves on the stage. And there are people who value that, and they value the difference and the individuality, and they want to change, and they're more progressive. And then there's the traditionalists. And it's like the pendulum between the two just never ends, and they can't make it in the middle. And I am so more on the progressive side, where I want to see change, and I want to see different stories, and I want to see different people telling their stories. And even from an educational standpoint, you know, in those settings, you're going to have a plethora of different kids with different experiences, with different capacities to, you know what I mean, to embrace this art. And you have to appeal. It's one of the hardest things to be a teacher, and I can't even imagine it. And I'm not an educator, and I'm not an aspiring educator, but I have the greatest respect for somebody who can connect with just an individual and to motivate them and mentor them and help them find that connection through themselves and find that growth in that art through themselves. And some people, and give them the freedom to be outside of the box or to be inside of the box, wherever they want to be. But it's just the fact that those two perspectives are just never meeting in the middle that prevents this industry from going further. And it sucks. It sucks. It's a self-hindering like process. It really is. Okay. Are we good? Are we good to move on? Okay.
It'll all circle back. I know what questions are next, so I'm like, let's go.
Yeah. So the third question is going to be, have you witnessed or been victim to discrimination? If so, how did you handle the mistreatment? Was your ability to speak up about the situation hindered or restricted in any way? This is a very personal one, so feel free to go as deep as you're comfortable going. No one wants to go first.
I'll say I have something. I was just over here looking at because you know I'm not always ready with the definitions of words, so I'm like, does this count as discrimination? Sure, we'll just say it does for a second. If it's not discrimination, then it's something, you know, nearby. I feel the thing that's happened most recently for me, and most often for me, you know, I've been privileged to be treated very well a lot of the time that I can remember. You know, part of the problem with some kinds of discrimination is we just swallow it up and move on because you're just trying to live. You're just trying to like, got to go to theory class. Can't worry about that someone just touched my hair in the hallway, whatever it is, right? Like, but what I wanted to bring up really quick was the, like, being told to wait, to me is like, yeah, it's coming. And I've had a number of conversations in the last 10 years about, you know, trying to program Black composers, all the things we already know. We've been talking about it all summer, right? Like, I'm starting to think, and I'm sure there's somebody who's going to watch this is going to say, starting to think, but I'm starting to think some of these institutions do not want to change, or at the very minimum, they would like to stay as close to what they are as possible while still fulfilling this, you know, outcry that they're like, all right, well, how many Black composers do we have to, you know, commission or program, and then you can be quiet about it, we can go back to Brahms. That's how it feels. That's like, you know, so I mean, with the rest of the question, that, I'm sorry, I just lost it, it's in my phone. How did I handle it? I don't know. I mean, you know, let's say 4 years ago, having these conversations over a dinner table, I stayed quiet because I liked the idea of, you know, all right, we hear you, and we're gonna work on that. And then you look later, or, you know, a couple years later, looking back, I'm like, they didn't do anything about this. And again, just with diversity real quick, just because you have some more Black people in your program or your orchestra doesn't mean you were responsible for that. Because us, I'm assuming, I don't know each of you super well, but at least for me, I'll speak for me, I was going where I was going regardless. My mom drove me to those lessons. My private teacher took care of me like she takes care of all of her students. I went to Juilliard. I did my thing. I had amazing faculty that helped me like get through. So that's another conversation, right? We only have a few minutes on me, but like, I took the audition. I found the money. I made some money. My grandparents, my mom, everybody, like my people made it happen. The people in my life supporting me made it happen. And then they're like, oh, so anyway, diversity. And I'm like, no, you didn't do that. So that's just a whole other thing. But that's all I have to say right this second.
Oh,
I see you, Clérida.
You see me reaching for that mute button, unmute. I feel like kind of not segueing, but kind of touching upon what you're saying. I feel like they kind of give us, you know, little trinkets of like just to pacify us, like hush, hush. Yeah, we'll do that, but they never get to it. Obviously, I've been a victim of discrimination within the classical music field multiple times. Sometimes within like multiple times in a weekend, depending on how many gigs I have booked. I don't really feel like energetically I want to get into anything specifically because I don't want to mess with my chicks. But at the same time, I feel like I have a responsibility to make it known that people need to know that just because you see a beautiful brown woman walking in all Black into this function doesn't mean that I'm here to work for you. I'm here to play for you. Right? I'm here to give my gift of music to help make your day more special. Don't you dare think I'm here to help you. Multiple occasions that's happened before. But I think kind of going back to what you said before is just dealing with it, you know, internalizing it, repressing it, and then somehow getting it out in a different way. You can also obviously talk about it within the situation, but I sometimes kind of am really bad at that. Because I tend to be super emotional, and it's hard for me to be very like, you know, sometimes, but I feel like handling it, I think there was like one instance where I did say something. The other string players stood up for me and said something too, like, you don't see her with her cello, why are you asking her about something about like that the waitresses would know. So I think it's also having a good system around you of people knowing and seeing what you go through so that they can also help you combat it in ways as well. So if anything, I feel like I restricted or hindered myself from being able to express it because I felt like I didn't want to stir the boat or rock the boat or make it too uncomfortable for anyone else, or be labeled as the angry Black woman, or, you know, be labeled as like, oh, everything's always about race when it comes to you. But it's, yeah, it is. Like, look at where I am and what I do and what the climate is of this environment right now that we're living in society. Like, of course, it's kind of all about race. If you think it's not, you're being ignorant, you know, you're being kind of oblivious, and not truthful to yourself or the situation. But yeah, discrimination, man. It's, there's even discrimination. It's kind of worse when it's between us, within our community. That's harder, you know? So it's real. It's real. But I mean, the best thing you could do is just continue to have your passion and your crafts continue to speak for you, and just use that and know that that's why you're there, is to share that. But yeah.
I love that. I love that you just brought that up.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I have two stories. I've experienced some things, obviously. Being a bassoonist, when I do walk in somewhere with this like really weird case, like, thankfully that has happened, but I've seen, Clérida, what you've talked about happen to so many Black string players. It just does not make any sense. But when I was at Peabody my last year, we were playing Puccinella and Sibelius II with Leon Fleischer, and it was amazing, but my health was like really bad. I didn't really know what was going on. I ended up having a seizure in the rehearsal. So they had to get security, and it was like really bad. I don't know why they didn't call EMS first, but they made me stand up and walk, which I then had another seizure and had to go back on the ground. So instead of just being like, because some of my friends were in that cycle, instead of being like, oh, like, what's going on? They were like, what drugs is he on? And I was just like, what the hell? You know, so it was just like, how did we get here? You know, like, what were the steps, the protocol? Why didn't you send the Black security guards? Because Peabody had like a good amount. I was like, there were steps we could have taken here that just were not. So that was one of them. And how I handled that was, I just like really leaned on my friends. Like, that year, Peabody accepted like a little more Black students than normal. So I had a lot of support, which was really nice. And it was like a really big catalyst for me just to be like, okay, we need to figure out what's going on here. But also understanding, like, I hadn't experienced a ton of medical racism in my life before. So that was like a very big wake up to what my life might be like if this is like a prolonged issue. Or with bipolar disorder, a lot of people think people that have mood disorders do a lot of drugs and like just drink all the time, live an unhealthy life, when we're just trying to not have any of this. And the other thing was this past year, my first year at Manus, I went to the library, you know, just minding my own business, getting my scores, and I have a lot of tattoos, but one of them says like live your best life, and it's just like written out. And the librarian just grabbed my arm and asked me if I got my tattoo from prison. And I was like, I was having such a great day. You know what I mean? It was just like one of those things. It's just like, why did you think that was okay? Firstly, grabbing me, no. Prison? You know, I was like, the whole, like, there's no way in your brain you're like, this is what we should have done. So going through that, but how I handled that is like, you know, I'm at a new place at Peabody. But like, me and my friends were living in that report office for trying to get all the racist people out. And at Manus, I was like, okay, I'm just trying to get the bag, like, and go home, you know? So I was just like, let's just give him the face and then leave. So later that year, the same librarian, I was getting ready to go to Banff, so I needed to get Liggety's 10 pieces. And, you know, that stuff is just like not really in print. So I went to go PDF it, and there was like an issue with a missing book or whatever, and I was like, well, y'all need to handle it. Like, I don't really know what to tell you. I just need to get the score. If I can't take it, that's fine. Protocol. I do need to PDF it though. And he was like, well, we can't trust you and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, what do you mean trust? And he was like, well, we don't know what you're going to do with it. And I was like, okay, now I'm 20. At the time I was 23. So I was like, we're a little older. We're not 18. Let's not go all the way off. Just send an email. That was the best email I have ever sent in my entire life. And it was just so cathartic. Like, in that moment, because I validate anyone that wants to just like go to hell off. But in that moment for me, I was just like, use the power you have today. You know, like you don't have to give this very racist white man this energy. You don't have to give him that energy back. So go ahead, give him that same collective, you know, I don't even see on TikTok, but it's like the collective black confusion face when they're just like, you know. So I just gave him that and walked away, called my teacher at the time, and she was like, we're gonna write an email. And it was solved in 10 minutes. Like, it was insane. I sent an email at 10 p.m. on a Saturday. I got a reply at 10:10 on a Saturday. So, you know, like, they are only listening when they think something bad's gonna happen to them, not really to us. So once you like really learn, like the whole system is kind of just like, you just have to protect you. And that has been the biggest thing I've learned with discrimination, is just protect the people around you, protect the people that look like you, make sure we're all getting the bag and are okay and safe. Because the white people, like, and it's not just white people that are discriminating against black people, they're out to, like, I don't know, sometimes, like, do you really wake up and you're like, I'm going to destroy 10 black people today? That is minimum. That is my goal. You know, so it's just, like, learning, like, okay, this is gonna, unfortunately, continue to happen to our life. How do we keep our joy? And that's, like, the question I have for myself for the future with dealing with these instances.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so easy for me to get very emotional about these things, because I agree with you, Clérida, like I am a very emotional person, and especially considering this topic, it's just, there have been multiple situations like before and during college where I've had a plethora of experiences, you know what I mean? And I don't want to open Pandora's box, but I found that in the more professional settings I get myself into, the wake up call that I had recently, and this was actually with a specific professor at my school, and it was happening for, like, it's been building up. Like, it wasn't just like an instance, like a one encounter kind of thing. Like, it was building up, and I ended up exploding, and I could have done it in a much better way, but I wrote a very maturely written Facebook post. And I'll be honest, I do not outwardly express anything in my personal life on social media. It's just like, I had a horrible experience when I was younger, and for some reason I haven't been able to do that ever since, you know? So it's hard for me with social media sometimes to express myself that deeply. And, you know, people at the school saw it. Like, I ended up having to take it down, and it was just a mess. And I walked in the school the next day, had a rehearsal with the same professor I encountered, and I could tell that, like, not only were there faculty members that looked at me differently, but there were students that frowned, like, you know, upon me doing that. And I ended up finding out, because, you know, people talk and whatever. And like, some people were like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. And of course you have those people. And then you have the other people who are like, oh, you're just being dramatic. You're just overreacting. And I'm like, really, it's like me to not react at all. In fact, it's like me to be very passive in my character and to completely avoid, like, you know what I mean? Like, or ignore you. Like, if I find that I'm just like not, I will just ignore that feeling or that situation or that person. And that's just who I am. So the fact that I actually chose to respond that way and to respond outwardly and express myself about it, and people found that dramatic, was like, what was dramatic was the fact that I have been going through that, and I've been silent about it for like a little over a year at this point. That was the dramatic part. And I have to be honest, because I was very insecure and very vulnerable after even expressing myself and my problem with that. And I had a professor who was very supportive, luckily, and who was very proactive in helping me find a solution for myself. But the students, above all, the students were almost just completely, I have to say, they were just so nasty. And I'm like, you're the future of this industry. You know what I mean? Some of you are educators, some of you are performers, but you're the future of this industry. And you see someone having the problem and not even knowing, you're not even aware of who I am or what I was even going through, because I didn't even share the whole experience. I was just speaking up about how wrong it was that I was going through that. And the fact that that energy came from the students disgusted me even more, because it's expected from an older generation, like white male. It's expected that they will be more conservative and more like nonchalant about an encounter like that. You know, not to say that all white men are like that, but it is expected when it happens. It's a bit more predictable. But when it's coming from your own generation and white people from your own generation, it's like, or even some Black people, like, you know what I mean, who found it like, oh, like, why are you just like making attention? I'm like, if you were going through that, because I'll be honest with you, to go from, like Clérida was saying before, to go from an environment where you're surrounded with people who are mostly look like you and act like you and understand your character, to a whole different category and demographic of human beings was a culture shock in itself. But then to be aspiring to be a leader in that setting makes it just even worse, because now people already didn't like you, but now people just don't want to see you succeed. Like, you know what I mean? Now people just don't want to see you succeed. Oh, you're standing in front of me right now? No, just because you look Black and your hair too puffy and I just don't like it. Like, I don't like how your eyes twinkle. Like, they pick at you for everything at this point, because you already have all the odds stacked against you. And God forbid, on top of that, you're strong enough to actually speak up for yourself. God forbid I have the audacity to disagree with anything and to disagree with how I'm being treated on top of that, because I am different. It's ridiculous. Because if you have the audacity to treat someone like that for being different, I should have just as much freedom to speak up for it. And it's repulsive to me that in any setting, like, you know what I mean? It's really repulsive that the people who have the audacity to initiate those situations aren't prepared for the retaliation after that. Especially when you're initiating it, especially when you are the instigator and you are the aggressor. Like, it does not make sense to me. Like, you had to have the balls to have something happen if you had the balls to do that. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Totally. And like, especially for our generation, we're like, where are you learning that? Where'd you get that from? Because that's the other excuse, is like, well, they're a certain age and that's just how it was in the day. Well, today's today. Why is it the same? But I mean, everything you just said, like, all
I think it
encompassing.
starts at home. Sorry, you said all encompassing.
Yeah, I was just saying like everything Christina said, like, went through just like anything I was like wanting to kind of say after, like, I thought maybe she was hitting a spot where I was gonna jump. I was like, oh nope, and she just hit what I was gonna bring up next. Oh, and yep, like you went all the places I wanted to go with that. And it was like, that was just, thank you for sharing that. That's all I need. I that was just like beautiful. Unfortunate, but you know. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Clérida.
I was actually taking a break from teaching at one of the studios out here on Long Island, in Belmore, actually, which is not too far from Valley Stream. I don't know if you guys have heard in the beginning of the summer about a nurse, a single mom that's living by herself, and she's being harassed. Like, she's Black and she's being harassed by her white neighbors. You know, they've been throwing feces in her yard and all that good stuff. But I worked 7 minutes from there at a studio, went out to go get some, you know, tea bags from my car. And I walked to my car and there's like cat like poop on my car. And there wasn't anyone around, so I kind of like was super perplexed. I looked around, and then the neighbor came around the fence. So the fence was like here, the studio's like here, there's a house, and his house is right here. So he comes around the fence to the property, the back, like the parking lot of where, you know, the studio is. And he's like, "You parked too close to my fence, lady." And I'm like, what do you mean? "So you did this?" He's like, "I didn't do that. I don't know what you're talking about." And I was like, "So why are you coming here talking to me about me parking too close to your fence? There's fecal matter on my vehicle. Why are you here talking to me, period? Obviously, you're the one that did this. You're guilty." So it was a really tough experience. I think the way I handled it was very, I called the cops and I filed a police report, and I did everything the right way, and I made sure that his name and his address was on it. And it was jarring because like the cops, when they came, they were asking me, was I playing loud music? Do I hang out here? And I'm like, my guy, it's like 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday. You think I'm here to hang out? Like, look at my license. I live the whole county away. Why would I come here to hang out on a Sunday morning in a parking lot? How dare you? Like, don't, but it's just a question of him not really, like, I called him, but he had to try to find something at fault that would make this justifiable, to justify this other man's action that was completely disrespectful, completely like, so what the hell does a police report do? You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day. But it was documented so that, I feel like I did my part in the sense so that if another teacher does work there, there's some type of paper trail so that this doesn't happen again. Yeah, it's just crazy on a Sunday, 10:30, like Sunday. Relax. I parked too close to your fence. Write a note. What happened? You don't have a Post-it? Like, your initial reaction was to go find feces and smear it on my car. And he came out with this big old belly, no shirt. It was crazy. And I had to go back in and teach. I had students lined up. I missed a half hour of teaching an hour of teaching because I was dealing with that. But yeah, that's what being, a classical musician, or being in a neighborhood that you shouldn't be in at a particular time, or that's what we face. That's what we have to deal with. And it wasn't until the cops came that the guy was like, "Oh, you want me to help you clean it?" I was like, my guy, if you weren't guilty, why are you trying to help me clean it? Don't touch my car anymore. I will clean it myself. I went inside, got some wipes, wiped the car off myself. The cop was just standing there and he was just watching me. And I was like, I was crying. I was so angry. Like, I just really wanted to like curse them all out. But this was like my 3rd month of teaching at that studio. I just met the secretary. Like, there are just so many, like, what do you do? Do you lash out and just like really say what's on your mind? Are you going to be labeled as this angry Black woman? Or are you going to, it's just so many little red lines. And like, it's really like, I don't know if you guys have seen like, the lasers and like the movie action shows where you have to like literally go through this and do that and just try to make it to the other side without setting off alarms and bombs and stuff. That's literally what it's like being a Black woman in the classical field at times, and how to navigate around it and not step on anyone's toes, but still, be like assertive.
No, it is crazy with that whole aspect of the different generation things. I'm from Texas, so, and I'm Priscilla, you're from Florida. So, those are just two very interesting pieces.
Lord.
So
Lord.
But the thing is, like, growing up there, I feel like as soon as I say I'm from Texas, the accent just starts to scream out of my body. But growing up there, I grew up with Latinx and Black people. Like, I did not really know any white people until I got to Peabody, and I was like, hello, So it was a very big culture shock. But it was also different for me because the white people I grew up with rode for us, like, they grew up with us. And we did not grow up in a very rich area, so we all had like pretty I would say we all had pretty similar experiences with financial things, because there were some very like low income areas in my school district. But that was the big difference of when I got to Peabody, and I was like, oh, these white people are not the same. You know, like if something happens, they will surely watch it happen, send that same little text, or stop you in the hall. I'm so sorry that happened. You know, it's like, well, say something. If anyone's not going to be like looked down upon for saying something, it's definitely going to be you. So, you know, it's just they don't use their voice. The privilege.
Or their privilege.
There, see, look.
Get out of my mouth. I'm going on mute. Bye.
It just is a mess, and it's so disheartening. It's so disheartening, you know, to go to school. I mean, these conservatories, they make us better, but also kind of ruin us on the inside. So, and go through all of these things, and I don't know, feel like you made a friend and play next to people for years, and then something happens, they're like, I didn't see it. You know, and it's just like, what the hell? You know, but you saw my post and you think that's bad. Because I've had experience just like, you know, and it just makes you like, I don't really talk to you anymore. So it is tough. It's tough coming from Houston, where, I mean, obviously in Texas, there is an immense amount of racism and every ism, phobia, everything. But with that said, in Houston, where I grew up, like, I'm not gonna say I didn't experience racism. I would say discrimination I experienced wasn't necessarily from white people. So that was very interesting. But yeah, that was a tough transition, going from white people that mostly like really wanted to make sure we were safe, make sure that we didn't go through shit, and then going to a very wealthy institution where some of these people were from Wisconsin and just have never seen one of us. You know, like that. It was too much. And then you have to learn how to like coexist, you know, because they say a lot that when, you know, you go to school, you have the diversity training, and I don't know where they're getting like the facts of black people that they teach to white people, but we have to also learn a lot for our safety around a very different group of people, because everyone is not from these different areas. So it's tough when you use your voice and people demonize you, and I'm really sorry you went through that. But you are doing amazing. And you don't have to tone police yourself at all. If you blew up, you blew up. They pushed you there. They win the
Lord
match.
knows.
Okay, look.
Lord knows. Seriously.
I get scared to do those in you know, not a situation where I've been invited to speak about diversity, you know, like I mean that too, but like anything that anyone has described so far, something like that is what I'm the most scared. It's almost like the opposite of what you were describing, Christina, when you were like, I'm normally here. So if I'm up here, that is a change of character. That means it was a big deal. Like I'm, you know, so outspoken and et cetera. And I tend to like pull back because it's just not comfortable. And I think in a different kind of way, but still just certainly with the word fear, I think people, myself included, because I've turned a blind eye to plenty of things in my day, and I'm doing it right now, I'm sure, for something, you know, but like, it's not the whole thing, but just one thing to me is like, we are so scared of understanding that we don't those things when people demonize, like some of them, I can't speak for them, but you know what I mean? Like sometimes I think we don't want it to be true. So we're like, oh, are you sure you didn't misinterpret, or are you it's like, we can't handle it. Whoever it is at that time, whoever the we might be, or whoever that person is, like it's like they can't, if what happened to you is true, or you is true, or whatever, it's like, well then what else is out there that I don't know about? Or you know, it's like we just, because everything crumbles and like, look where we are, you know, we're trying to like prevent more crumbling, but it might just be what it is. We just gonna have to deal with all of it when we could have dealt with, you know, piece by piece at different times, and we just left it alone, and now it's still there. It didn't go away. That whole sweep under the rug thing is, the rug has like, you know, unraveled all by itself. So now there's nothing covering it anymore. Unfortunate. Well, fortunate and unfortunately, but
You hit it on the head, Priscilla, because but a big thing in our field, especially like the schools, is idolization of these professors, of these guest artists, of these huge names, and they have a cult following, and as soon as you say something that this person did to you, they're like, there's no way. They're such a good musician. And I don't really know how becoming a great musician equates to being a great person. So if anything, you spend a lot of time in that practice room
Right.
and you don't really know how to socialize. So there's just a lot, there's just so much wrong, and it's so intersectional, and that's the thing. If someone came up to me and was like, Joe, your mom just completely yelled at me today, and I don't know why, and I was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I believe you. She probably did, and it's probably because you did this. But if someone came up to me and was just like, oh, this person was super racist to me, that's a whole different conversation, and you need to like listen, not listen to respond. So, and that is the big thing that just doesn't happen with people that look like us, especially the three of you being Black women. Like with everything that happened, it's just they don't listen to us. They don't, and it's just so infuriating. It's so infuriating. And what is the next steps? Like how do we dismantle this cult following of, I mean, I don't want to name any names, but of a major artist, Like, how do you do that? Because there was that thing about, like, Yuja Wang a couple weeks ago in the Orchestra's Racist page, and people were immediately just like, no, 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 but we shouldn't, just because you hear a name and you idolize this person, you shouldn't immediately be like, there's no way they can do that. But instead realize that no one is morally absolute, and everyone is capable of making mistakes. And it doesn't mean that now she's just this terrible person, but she can learn and never do this again. But if you immediately coddle someone when they've been accused of harm, where are we gonna get? And like these are the steps that I see, and with the getting better with diversity, getting better with classical music, and all of these progressive things, is that the next steps need to start happening. Like these people need to be educated, but it's not our job to educate them. They need to have the resources, and I think a big thing though is that like everyone can kind of make a mistake, but the mistake can very much vary of levels of severity. But that, yeah, it's the idolization to me has been one of the biggest issues when it comes to speaking out.
I also just very, very quickly was going to say that I don't think, same thing with immediate innocence and immediate like, oh, well, we're just not going to deal with that because they're so great at music or whatever, like all the idolization. I also, no matter what level someone is at, I don't think it should be immediate like cancel either. I am not here for cancel culture. I am not into it. So that's all. Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah. Okay. I definitely think that all of the responses to this was needed and necessary. Like, I don't care if maybe we stepped on some toes in this conversation. That's the point. That's the point. And it sucks that us speaking up about these things, there's this level of how far we can go about expressing our struggles before it always makes us look bad. Always makes us look bad. That's always something that we have to consider, and it sucks. It sucks.
And risking our careers.
But that's why I think the sense of community is really important, because now when something happens, because it's not an if, like things will continue to happen to us. I've kind of stopped going into white spaces or kind of stopped going to the white admin, and I just go talk to the Black Student Union or like the one Black faculty member we have at that school, and just be like, so what can we do about this? And just really just fight it with us, and then we are a united front, and then we bring in, they're just like, I didn't even know we had this many of you in the school. So it's just, those are some things that I have found that helped when it comes to speaking out, because people will come for your throat. Like with the whole like Donovan MSM thing, like I made that post. I didn't think it was going to do all that. The DMs I were getting, I was just like, y'all need help. Like why are you threatening me over someone that probably doesn't know your name? Like what is the point of that? Like, why are you inciting violence from people wanting East Asian people and Black people and Latinx people to stop being discriminated against at a school that costs $80,000 a year? So it just, it's just these things of why is speaking out so terrible for you. And it probably doesn't affect you directly. So.
Agreed. All right. I'm going to move on that note. The last question is, does tradition promote or hinder classical music? If so, how can we incorporate change with or without tradition in classical music?
All right. I think the first thing that came to mind for me is this all depends on what, iteration of classical music we want to be moving forward with, because keeping it like it is, tradition's doing just fine for it. It's working as it has for a long time, for forever, I believe. If we want classical music to be different than it is, I think tradition is hindering. Some traditions are definitely getting in the way of making changes, because tradition in classical music to me is not about change insofar as what I've been taught, or my perception of what I've been taught. So that's my quick kind of reaction on that initially.
Okay, so I think everything should be on a spectrum, right? I feel like there needs to be a balance between tradition and balance between reaching out and experimenting. I think tradition does sometimes hinder classical music when you have the same cellist sitting in the same fourth seat for 62 years and he's never left. I think when it comes to that, I think tradition definitely hinders that, because you have all these great, wet behind the ear young musicians coming out of these amazing conservatories, and they want to play in these classical orchestras and they want to do all these amazing things, but they cannot because someone's grandparent is still sitting in the seat. So grandfathering seats and keeping people in it, I don't think is conducive to promoting any type of change or even diversity in the orchestra. But then at the same time, I also, how can we incorporate change? I think it's just infiltrating, having more people look more like us. I'll keep teaching the little black and brown babies these classical instruments and push them into the field as much as we can. Have a sense of community where they can reach out to other people and ask for lessons or instruction or anything, even if it's an etude, and it doesn't have to be like an arm and a leg and $100 for a lesson for help. Like, no. So I think classical music period is built to be super expensive. Like a set of strings for my cello is $250. I don't even want to ask you, Christina, how many you have a set of strings on for your bass. So it's restringing your instrument, like rehairing the bow. It's just expensive. I'm pretty sure we've been through a lot of technological advances where we could find things that are cheaper to help us. But, so the tradition of making the instruments, how to take care of it, how to study it, is that helping us to this point now when we have like screens and stuff that can help us? Or different ways of making the instruments where they could last longer or something? I don't know. But I think it all just needs to be on a spectrum. I think it also, you need to know what happened in the past so you know where you're going to go in the future. And obviously learn from mistakes of others in the past so you know what to, avoid in the future too. So I think it's just a spectrum thing. Depending on how you look at it, it can promote it or keep it stifled and not growing. But either way, it needs to grow. If not, it's not alive. And I feel like classical music definitely needs to continue evolving and changing. And yeah, I don't even play classical music more. I play Bach like once a week, but it's still using that instrument in a way that's it's a classical instrument, but in a fresh new way. I think that's inspiring, and I think a lot of people would love to see that and hear that from us.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. Just real quick, I just wanted to second that motion. I think the balance, the spectrum, growing, or you're not alive, like all of it.
Definitely, yes.
I would say the tradition of just like the concert hall in general is like where I would start. Is why are orchestras having to dress up? Why are people having to dress up to come to this? Like, why is there a respectable level of appearance associated with listening to this music? You know, what is different from listening to Rite of Spring than going to listen to the baby? You know, so it's just both of them are parties. So that's my biggest thing because I hate dressing up to play. I hate dressing up in that way to go play. And because when with my students, you know, teaching when I was teaching in Houston, all of them are black and brown. So I was like, "What is your idea of dressing up to go play somewhere?" And they're like, "I want to be dripped down." And I was like, "Be dripped down exactly." Like it's so different from person to person. Some of my kids that were from West Africa, they're like, "We don't wear our traditional garb," but I was like, "Do that. Do what you want," you know. But with that, and then also the one of the biggest things was just like the idea of professionalism. It just what is professional based off of? It's based off of white supremacy concept. It's us to like assimilate to them, and that inside of orchestra is so detrimental. As second bassoon, I don't know if it's still this way, but when I was at a festival, I was told the second bassoon is you don't really get to raise your hand and like ask a question. You have to like tell your principal, and then your principal ask it. And it's like, I'm sorry, I felt like we were freed. So it just was really interesting for me to go through that. And that was like one of the biggest transitions of me kind of leaving orchestra so much and kind of starting doing the soloist thing. But there's so many systems in there that are just so capitalist. Like, why is the front seat more expensive than the back? Personally, I feel like you hear a little better, a little farther away. So, you know, there's just so many things of that way, but the same thing though, it was all just so built on so much wrong that it just has to be completely restructured, and here's the time to do that, you know. And that's the big thing. I mean, a lot of my friends who have been aspiring to be in orchestra this whole time that also low-key have been shitting on experimental contemporary musicians don't really have work right now, and they're really trying to reinvent themselves and figure out like, where do we go from here? What if orchestras don't come back? Because some orchestras are not coming back. And it's just a time of like, okay, how do you make a chamber orchestra that will play with the baby? You know, like it just, these are all of the things is how do we change it now? How do we kind of just get rid of tradition and getting rid of that extreme tenure? I completely agree. Like, why are we still here? This could be someone new's seat. It just doesn't make sense. And the thing is, y'all, it's not just in orchestra where this is happening, because contemporary ensembles are still in this umbrella of classical music. They don't have auditions. They have like invite only stuff, you know. So it like, what's the difference? You can be in the ensemble the whole time until like you kind of get fired or you decide to leave. Like that spot is yours, you know. So all of these different ensembles, orchestras, whatever, like it just needs to be most of the traditions need to be completely dismantled. But it's so hard to even look and see what that would look like, because what does an orchestra look like that doesn't have auditions, you know, or like this type of audition, or if they're all video audition, you know. There's so many systems that are so ingrained that like, what do we do? What do we do? And this also the capitalist approach to music. Like, I was told that my Fox bassoon was not going to get me super far, and it wasn't the student model, and it was already really expensive. And like, you have to get a Heckle. And I was like, do you have Heckle money? Because it starts at like 35 grand. So I remember talking to my mom, just being like, girl. And she was like, girl. And I was like, well, Loan Central, you know. So it just sucks that like this was the route I had to take, because I don't have a great aunt that's going to be like, that's 40,000. Here we go. You know. So this whole approach, because cane is expensive. Each bassoon, like reed making tool, costs minimum $500. Like the profilers and things. So it just is insane. Maintenance. So it's just so expensive, and I want to see so many different black and brown bassoonists, but financially it's crazy. So to have like the right equipment, you know, so there's just so many things that just gotta go.
Agreed. I think that the prestige to classical music, it has been something that idealize about the genre itself, and that has brought it this far, but at the same time, it closes itself to a lot of other audiences and demographics of whole races of people, I want to say, at certain, you know, to that extent, like who just would not even want to engage with anything classical because there's this prestige to it. And I mean, I agree, like the etiquette is based on white, like literally historically white behaviors and what they thought was the best. And they thought that at the time. And you know what? Maybe it was best for them at that time. But in any, like in any genre of music, like it evolves. It evolves. And they leave room like for, there's this tradition of like the art itself is in this box. And I feel like I go back to this box idea because of course you want something, you want the art to be good enough when you're creating an art, like you want it to be good enough, but then there's this extent like, what makes my art good enough? And I think all of these limitations that classical music has in order to make itself good enough limits itself from truly being the most that it can be, especially in this day and age. I keep hearing, oh, like, you know, classical music is dying. Classical music is dying. And of course, obviously with COVID, it is dying, performance itself. But how can we revive it in a way after this is done to help us move forward and not be stagnant and not be in the same place that we were before this? It's frustrating. It really is. Because tradition in anything, whether it's a family tradition, whatever, in everything, like it is something that keeps it what it is. But at the same time, at this point in classical music, it's limiting itself from being much more. That's all I have to say. Does anyone have anything else to say?
Of course. I was just gonna say, like, I've been over here scribbling notes every time we've been hitting these topics, and I'm just so happy that we are talking about this and we get to do this. We have the space, and I'm ready to talk more. I can't wait till we do this again. I'm just like, yeah, I'm just happy for this community that we have right here, right now.
Yeah. I thank you guys for making it out for the discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your time and participating and being a part of this, because a lot of this discussion is just to give a platform for other people to just have a conversation. You know, just having a conversation can go so much further than not having one at all. And I think that it's important that at least people are hearing Black and Brown musicians speaking about these things and knowing that there's someone else who is going through these things, because they might know that it's happening somewhere out there, but they're not hearing about it, and they might not know anybody face to face that's going through something that they might be going through now. And even outside of classical music itself, just being Black and Brown and trying to be successful in a predominantly white, Caucasian, European field is hard. It's very hard. So thank you for having the conversation, because the conversation alone makes a difference. Thank you.